Good day, everyone. I am Rosemary G. Gajana from BSed Science 1B, and I was assigned to continue the other half of Ms. Batak's report, which is the multiple crises of global capitalism. So, before we proceed to the discussion, I have here the learning objectives, which is at the end of the lesson, students are able to know the author of the multiple crises of global capitalism and able to know what is global capitalism and able to understand the multiple crises of global capitalism. So without further ado, let us know who is Walden Flores Bello. Walden Flores Bello is the author of the multiple crises of global capitalism. He is the Filipino academic, environmentalist, and social worker who served as a member of the Representatives of the Philippines and also a professor of sociology at the State University of New York and a senior research fellow at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies of Kyoto University in Japan. So since I'm going to discuss the multiple crises of global capitalism, let's define first what is global capitalism. So global capitalism is a capitalism that transcends national borders. As a review of Ms. Batak's report, the financial crisis is one facet of the systemic and converging crisis of capitalism, predictable symptoms of oligopolistic late capitalism, but what main challenges lie ahead for the left in South Africa? So according to the study, the world crisis and beyond alternatives and transformation paths to overcome the regimes of crisis capitalism, anti-capitalist analysts of global crisis like Walden Bello, Mamdouh Habashi, Franco Hautert, and Sami Namir argue using their own perspectives. So I have here the further perspectives that would give us a deeper understanding about the global crisis. So first, financial and productive capital, multiple dimension of the crisis, systemic, dynamic, and intrinsic to capitalism. Ms. Batak already discussed these three perspectives, so let's move to the number 4, which is crisis from the neoliberal version of capitalism or crisis from capitalism per se. Number 5, oligopolistic and imperialistic late capitalism. And lastly, strategic perspectives on the immediate and further future. So as a continuation of the perspectives, so we have here number 4, crisis from the neoliberal version of capitalism or crisis from capitalism per se. So in light of the above, the interrelationship between the rule or functioning and the effects of neoliberal globalized capitalism in creating the current crisis or crisis, on one hand and on the other hand, the rule of intrinsic dynamics within capitalism per se in creating the current and recurrent crisis is thus clear. These processes are intricately interrelated and mutually reinforcing. In sum, neoliberalism in practice and as a theoretical rationalization is clearly itself a direct outcome and requirement for capital to be able to break out of the dilemmas of overproduction and limitations under profit maximization in their home economies. This outward drive was also important as an offensive strategy to try to outflank and preempt effective productive competition advancing further from within other economies in the world, particularly but not only in Asia. So, neoliberalism is contemporarily used to refer to market-oriented reform policies such as eliminating price controls, deregulating capital markets, lowering trade barriers, and reducing, especially through privatization and austerity state influence in the country. It seeks to transfer the control of economic factors from the public sectors to private sectors. The dilemmas of northern-based capitalist enterprises and investors are, however, accentuated because some of the more adept governments of the South separately and collectively manage to retain certain national policy space. Thus, some economies in South are able to make some small but significant financial and technological gains from the operation of international capital in their countries. Some such government also contrive to provide direct or indirect supports to domestic enterprises to enable them to continue growing and even take advantage of the consumer markets, the financial needs, and other economic opportunities or acquisition in the richest country, most notably the US, of course. At the same time, the processes of capital overaccumulation and concentration in the financial centers in the north are also accentuated by the foreign reserve strategies of governments in the south, largely focused on northern based banks and on the purchase of rich country government bonds. These capital flows are augmented by the legal or illegal capital transferred to the north by the small but very affluent economic and political rentier classes and more economically successful or richly resource endowed countries of the south. These added yet further to the accumulating resources and power of financial institution in the north and the ever higher levels of financialization of these economies. So next is the oligopolistic and imperialistic late capitalism. So what also emerges clearly from the above is that the inherent dynamics of capitalism demands the unceasing expansion of capitalist production and unlimited consumption throughout the world. The opening up of all countries and all sectors to the operations of capitalist forces and competition between them for control over markets and resources throughout the world is promoted by their national governments through all the economic or financial and political legal means required. This includes resource to military means when necessary. This expansion or penetration and control has in recent years also been promoted through multilateral institutions, above all the IMF or WB and the WTO, but this has not ended the plurilateral, bilateral, and unilateral exercise of force by the more powerful governments around, even within these very institutions. Thus, the expansionary and imperialistic nature of capitalism continues in both the political or military and economic, social, and cultural dimensions. At the same time, there is an ever increasing concentration of ownership and control within ever fewer banks and other financial institutions, and within ever bigger globalized corporations and conglomerates. The financial corporations are now considered too big to fail and feel they are too big to be controlled or even regulated by governments. The conglomerates are being combined willingly or forcibly through cannibalistic mergers and acquisitions in each and every sector. The overwhelming financial, economic, political, ideological, social, and cultural power exercised by such gargantuan financial and other economic entities, agencies, is creating the unprecedented oligopolistic concentration of power over and overriding the formal processes and institutions of political democracy, even where they exist. At the same time, however, the erstwhile hegemony of one global superpower now faces a future of multiple challenges in an emerging multipolar world. The question for anti-capitalist analysts, governmental and non-governmental, and all labor and social movement activists is how capitalist concentration and control can be countered by global socio-economic diversification and social ecological transformation and genuine institutionalized popular democratic power. This is now both a crucial need for social equity and justice and a survival necessity for humanity and the planet. So the last perspective is the strategic perspectives on the immediate and further future. Organized mass responses to their extreme exploitation, disposition, and oppression is growing, although unevenly, in the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa. Such mass reaction will undoubtedly continue, especially as they are hit most forcefully by the climate instabilities and ecological crisis threatening the whole world. What is more, the market modalities proposed to deal with this crisis and the levels and forms of economic activity and policies still being pursued by powerful corporate forces and governments will contribute further to the looming climate and ecological crisis now and into the future. In the period immediately ahead, the crisis in the real economy will not disappear, even if the functioning of the financial sector seems to be stabilized since the upheavals of recent years. The banks continue to retain enormous financial, economic, and consequent political power. This will not be reduced even if some precautionary national and international regulatory ground rules may eventually be devised to make their operations more sound and less prone to risk taking. The stock markets continue their establishing modus operandi unabated. They continue to exploit whatever opportunities they find or foresee in the real economies. Financial operators or speculators are unshamedly manipulating to their immediate profitable advantage the struggles within the between corporation, the fluctuations in different commodities and sectors and in national economies the world over, and even beating on potential sovereign debt defaults of the most troubled countries. The reported improvements in the business climate and the apparent return to investments in revived production and consumption and growth have yet to be confirmed on the ground, but more global growth is actually a problem in itself. Furthermore, even such revived production will not produce a return to employment for the hundreds of millions of unemployed the world over. A business will characteristically take advantage of the current crisis to reduce their employee number and labor costs, and even the labor rights and conditions that have been established. In short, over and above the long-term environmental and climate threats, the established features of oligopolistic late capitalism and the immediate crises that have been created in the key economic and social sectors are set to continue. The scenario ahead is continued instability and unpredictability, fluctuations in investments, production, and consumption, and of course, in the world climate patterns. The period ahead will also see further shifts within and between economies and in the global distributions of economic and political power. In South Africa, with its already acute social and economic imbalance, resource misuses, and environmental abuses, the challenges of the ongoing crisis created and aggravated by globalized industrial capitalism and climate change are going to be particularly marked. The common sources of these crises in the very functioning of capitalism provide the basis for forces of the left and growing social movements to build their respective campaigns and their mutual support and solidarity in creating alternatives for their communities and the whole country. But this must be with the rest of the Southern Africans region and the African continent, and in ways that are also to be benefit and humanity and our planetary home. That will be all. Thank you for listening. Hope you learned something about my discussion.